523, negative.
Kurt Russell has given us some of the most iconic characters in cinema history, and it's not surprising that, somehow, each of these characters makes us demand more. While there's no saying if we will ever see a return of Jack Burton or Snake Plissken, it wouldn't be surprising if his character, Todd 3465, from the cult favorite 1998 film Soldier, gets some well-deserved attention. While it might look like something in the league of Universal Soldier and a number of sci-fi action films that had come out around that time, underneath the plot lurks references that explore a universe of vast possibilities. Let's explore some amazing facts about the 1998 film Soldier, from the Blade Runner relationship to the crazy number of references. Before we get into this explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. A Blade Runner sibling? If anyone asks about the greatest sci-fi film released in the 80s, then Blade Runner will definitely make it into the list, and rightfully so. David Webb Peoples was one of the scriptwriters for the film, and while working for Blade Runner, he started on his screenplay for Soldier, and he has maintained that there's a chance that both films might be set in the same universe. According to him, Soldier is a sidequel to Blade Runner, and yes, sidequel is a real word since both the films have many common events and Soldier features references that only a hardcore fan might recognize. In fact, the premise for Soldier is based on an unused opening sequence for Blade Runner where we see a group of replicants being dumped in an off-world colony and left for dead. Once you know the context, you can draw many parallels between the arcs of Rutger Hauer's Roy Batty from Blade Runner and Kurt Russell's Todd from Soldier, since both undergo a significant development based on the circumstances they're put into. Even production designer David L. Snyder has confirmed that he built into the narrative that both these movies occur in the same universe by showing the Spinner, a flying car from Ridley Scott's masterpiece, appearing in the colony where Todd is taken as a defunct. So, it might not be Alien vs. Predator level obvious, but it is subtle enough to make one think about the possibilities if the idea were properly explored. Number of directors. Soldier had become a project of massive interest ever since the early 80s, and everyone was eager to get on with the project, with the genre in particular being a hit in the first half of the decade. Sylvester Stallone had just come off the first Rambo film, and he showed interest in the project along with his director, Ted Kotcheff. The two were involved in the project, and it was supposed to work like that until Stallone backed out, and then the next candidate would be Clint Eastwood, who would also back out of the project. But it wasn't long before the actor mentioned how much he liked the script and wanted to helm it himself. In fact, not many would know this, but even Keanu Reeves was supposed to be attached to the project at one time in the lead role. The script went through many different studios for the next 15 years. It even went through Andor creator, the brilliant Tony Gilroy, who was said to have done some uncredited rewrites on the screenplay, until finally it became the version we saw with Paul W.S. Anderson of Mortal Kombat fame taking over the directorial duties. So, the script was literally 15 years old by the time Paul W.S. Anderson started working on it, and he made sure that the project belonged to him, as the 3465 in Kurt Russell's character's name, Todd 3465, is a reference to Anderson's birth date, March 4th, 1965. Clint Eastwood bothered the filming. Even though he didn't end up making the project his own, Clint Eastwood did happen to have some interest in the project as he went to witness the shooting. And Paul W.S. Anderson remembers this moment very clearly as, in his words, "It's the first week of shooting and we're on a soundstage. I had a British actor, Sean Pertwee, who I'd used in several of my projects, but this was the first time he was on the Warner Brothers lot doing a Warner's movie. It was a big deal. He was acting with a big movie star, Kurt Russell, and it was his first big line of dialogue, big speech with Kurt, and he was intimidated. I could see that. It was a lot of pressure. We're about to go for his first close-up, and suddenly the bell rings and the doors to the soundstage open, and in strides Clint Eastwood. He's totally backlit. This amazing movie star, Oscar-winning director, and a friend of Kurt Russell's. And he's very tall as well. He's quite a presence. Sean, as nervous as he was before, now his nerves double. Oh my God, there's Clint Eastwood. I didn't know it, but I was using the crew that Clint uses. So Clint says hello to everybody, and he says hi to Kurt, and then of course, he says hello to Sean. All of this takes about half an hour, which of course I'm pleased to lose half an hour of my shooting day because it's Clint Eastwood, but also time's ticking. It's going into overtime. And just when we think he's going to leave completely, Clint turns around and stands behind my chair, watching the monitor as we do our first take with Sean Pertwee. And Sean, he just drowned. His mouth opened and no sound came out. He didn't even get the dialogue wrong, he just couldn't even speak, and I don't blame him. Then we go for take 2 and he's like, ugh. And then, after take 2, Clint goes, I think I better leave. The circumstance would create a hatred for sound stages for Anderson, and he made sure that most of his future films were not shot on sound stages.
Sir!
Kurt Russell's training. By the time the production for Soldier began, Kurt Russell had established himself as an action star, appearing in some of the best John Carpenter films that would be cult hits. Then there was his appearance next to Sylvester Stallone in Tango and Cash. During the commentary for Big Trouble in Little China, Kurt Russell clarified that he had only ever taken another action project because of the paycheck. But it isn't entirely about the money, considering everything apart from the surfing moment in Escape from LA is a product of his complete dedication. Yeah, we had to make a joke about the surfing scene, but in the same film, there's the iconic shot of him nailing every shot during a basketball challenge. The actor practiced in between shooting to make sure, and it surely worked because that full-court shot is as real as it gets. Similarly, in preparation for Soldier, Russell wanted to bulk up naturally instead of using steroids, and the actor actually managed to get it done. He worked out about 3 to 4 hours daily for 18 months to get himself in shape for the character. The only trouble with that was that the lengthy training ended up delaying the project and moving the shoot to a time when it would be affected by another major problem. But you got to agree, it was worth seeing Kurt Russell nailing himself to give us an action piece with his distinct look and feel. Enter the event horizon. With the delay in production and an 18-month regimen for Kurt Russell to get into shape for the film, Paul W.S. Anderson made another of his cult classic films, Event Horizon. But the failure of that film could have prevented Anderson from working on another sci-fi feature right away. Instead, he got to have some good words from the star of his next movie, which somehow makes absolute sense. According to Anderson, when the movie was first released, it did okay business, but it wasn't what I had hoped for. I was going on to make a movie with Kurt Russell, 1998's sci-fi action film Soldier, and I showed him Event Horizon. He said, Paul, in 20 years' time, that's the movie you're going to be really glad you made. He was right. I thought it was very generous of Kurt, considering I was about to go and make a movie with him. Isn't this enough evidence that we need to get the original cut for Event Horizon? El Nino Hurricane. Natural calamities have a thing for filmmakers. Numerous times, a director tried to complete an ambitious project and failed because of a natural disaster. Terry Gilliam got a documentary out of it when his dream project, based on the book Don Quixote, was ruined each time because of a storm and even a flood at one point. While Soldier was already delayed due to Russell's intense training regime, when the production actually started to take shape, another major trouble popped up in front of the team. The El Nino storm arrived and managed to force the team to move to sound stages instead of keeping to their original plans for making the film. In fact, Paul W.S. Anderson hated the experience and ended up quoting, I would say the most stressful movie for me was probably Soldier, which I did with Kurt Russell. You know how important space is to me. I had originally designed it as an exterior shoot. It was going to be all these amazing landscapes. I had big plans, and we were shooting in California, and we had these El Nino storms, the worst in history. Epic winds, huge rains, I couldn't shoot outside. The sets were collapsing. It was never intended to be a studio movie, but that's what it became, so it was stressful. Not because of the people I was working with, Kurt Russell is delightful and a dream to work with, but just because I wasn't capturing what I wanted to capture. Alternate titles. When David Webb Peoples originally wrote the film, he had titled it The Base, and it would go on to have some significant changes to end up as Soldier, something that, once again, shows that David was trying to reference a particular event from Blade Runner. But the title Soldier worked quite well, and when it was put next to the amazing artwork in the poster, it perfectly nailed the job and actually became something that can gather quite a lot of interest from fans of the genre. However, the movie got some interesting alternate titles upon its worldwide release, with each version focusing on a certain aspect of the film. While Hungary made a simple change and made it The Soldier, Brazil went a few steps further and converted it to the badass title The Soldier of the Future. Yep, that's a title that definitely grabs your attention. Turkey made it into Asker. Yeah, you can literally see the word Asker on the posters for the film there. But that doesn't hint at a completely different aspect of the movie because Asker means soldier in their language. But our favorite alternates are The Last Soldier from Spain and Galactic Warrior from Poland. Broken ankle. As if the storm wasn't enough for the film, Kurt Russell ended up breaking his ankle during the production. Even though it was reported to have happened during a stunt, according to the press statement, other sources have suggested that it might have been because of an ornamental cabbage during a break. Now, we don't know what the real reason might have been, but it's quite clear that after all of this, they didn't want to drop the actor and move on with someone else, so they managed to figure out a workaround to make things easier for everyone. The accident occurred during the first week of filming, and Russell was given a week off for healing. But by the time he returned to set, all the scenes where Todd was supposed to be lying down had already been shot. To keep up with the actor's healing process, they started filming the scenes where he's sitting down and then moved into the scenes that involved standing still. The action sequences were shot at the very end, so the running sequence between Todd and Kane's 607 ended up being the last filmed scene. Some might have thought that after so much trouble, Russell could have given up and left the project, but the actor clarified, "Come hell or high water, I wasn't going to let that payday go away." Father and son. Kurt Russell's son Wyatt Russell has managed to break into Hollywood with an interesting variety of projects, with his Marvel Cinematic Universe entry putting him in league with the best of the best. The father-son duo has pulled off two significant characters in the franchise, but this isn't their only franchise. They took things to a new level of meta with their appearance as the older and the younger Lee Shaw from the Monarch Monsterverse, a movie that worked quite well for the franchise. But this wasn't the first time that the two had done this. A young Wyatt Russell appeared in the role of the 11-year-old Todd during the scene where we get to see Todd's past. Hardcore fans of Kurt Russell might have also noticed a 10-year-old Wyatt Russell appear as one of the orphans in Escape from LA. Not a lot of father-son duos have thought about doing this, and yet it seems to work quite fine in the case of Russell. In fact, production houses were trying to rope Wyatt into taking on the role of a young Jack Burton or Snake Plissken, but the actor has clarified that touching those two iconic characters might count as career suicide.
Landing party. Hey! Over here!
SciFi Galore. Paul W.S. Anderson seems to have quite an interesting collection of sci-fi references in mind. Soldier features some amazing references that only true fans of the genre could pick up, ranging from the Looney Tunes to Kurt Russell's past works. A complete collection of Easter eggs can be seen on the computer screen when Todd's service record is displayed there. We can see that Todd received the Plissken Patch, O'Neill Ring Award, Cash Medal of Honor, Could Have Done Better, McCready Cross, Captain Ron Trophy, McCaffrey Fire Award, and the fairly obvious Dexter Riley Award. Each of these is a reference to Kurt Russell's wide range of projects, from the absolutely brilliant The Thing and the Escape movies to the much-loved Tango and Cash, to his early Disney entries with the Dexter Riley trilogy. Trekkies might have noticed the Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan references with the citations for the Nibian Moon Campaign, the Antares Maelstrom War, and the War of Perdition's Flames. Another amazing and fun reference is the mention of the Illudium Pu-35 ESM weapon in the list of firearms that Todd has been trained on, as it has a deep connection with Mars. Also known as the Pu-36 Explosive Space Modulator, it's the same gun that Bugs Bunny's friend Marvin the Martian can be seen wielding and threatening to use against Earth. But that's not the only weapon reference, because the list also mentions the USMC Smart Gun and the M41A pulse rifle from the 1986 film Alien, and it also has the Doom Mark IV BFG, a reference to the video game Doom. Even though Harrison Ford's Han Solo didn't end up meeting Todd, the film managed to reference him with Kessel and Anowat appearing in the Trinity Moon screen near the end of the movie, along with MNR8 and Slarty Barfast, which are references to a planet in the 1967 episode of Star Trek, A Taste of Armageddon, and the hilariously named character from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. They also managed to reference another major cult sci-fi film, Buckaroo Banzai, across the 8th dimension, mentioning Planet 10. Yeah, that's a lot of references and connections to franchises to be considered canon. Playing with heights. One of the most intelligent things about Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings franchise is the use of forced perspective, and it seems that Paul Anderson has to use something similar in Soldier. There are scenes where the military vehicles are supposed to indicate the authority and the power that they have, and even though they do appear large, they needed to appear larger because of the image it would create for the audience. 4-foot-tall people were used in these scenes so that the machines looked larger next to the military vehicles. Meanwhile, Jason Scott Lee's Kane 607 was made to appear taller than the other characters to make him more intimidating, while the actor was only 5'9", 2 inches shorter than both Russell and Jason Isaacs. The effect worked because he looked quite intimidating at the end of the day. The Lost Snakes! Until Snakes on a Plane came out, we were convinced that Soldier featured a crazy amount of snakes, and we were actually right because the movie features about 350 snakes on set. Even though it's a Hollywood project, they went absolutely bonkers and managed to use Thai vipers, considered to be extremely venomous. In fact, they couldn't be defanged, so there are times where you can see stitches that have been made around their mouths for the safety of the actors. But none of that really matters when you find out that they would lose about 30 of these snakes each time they were used for a shot. They didn't die, they actually lost them. You might be worried about that, but the handlers didn't think much of it, and they did manage to find all the snakes in the end. Who can forget the iconic scene where one of the snakes leaps 3 feet to attack Todd, and he ends up grabbing it? Turns out that wasn't really his hand because the snakes were considered too dangerous to be held by him. A man of few words. Kurt Russell went through quite a physical transformation for the film as he managed to showcase a good amount of physical acting here. But then, the script actually worked in his favor because he hardly spoke throughout the entire run, having only 104 words in total with an on-screen presence of 85% of the film. And it absolutely worked because even though the film has its issues, no one forgets to mention the wonderful performance that Russell gave for this film. In fact, the physical performance was badass enough to make Colonel Meekum wet his pants when he discovers that Todd is still alive. Yeah, the scene wasn't in the script, but turns out the pee wasn't real either. It was actually pineapple juice. If you think about it, Todd was intimidating enough to make someone pee pineapple juice. The Deleted Space Battle. Blade Runner again. One of the sequences that fans really missed out on from the trailer was a battle with about 20 to 30 spaceships around a planet that takes place in space, and at some point, we get to see a corpse floating around with the name Clark mentioned on its badge. Now, it's said that the scene was cut due to the very next detail we'll be exploring. There's a massive chance that it could have been one of the numerous battles that we see mentioned on Todd's records. It seems like I wasn't really done with the Bladeunner Sibling universe point, as another detail further solidifies the connection between these two movies. Remember that final monologue from Rutger Hauer's Roy Batty in the end? He mentions the battles of Tannhauser Gate and Shoulder of Orion, and both of these battles are displayed on Todd's service record. One of the film's major implications is that the genetically engineered soldiers were supposed to replace Todd and his battalion and were none other than the replicants. These events occur around 2035, and the 2017 short film 2036 Nexus Dawn, set right between the events of Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049, indicates that the Nexus 9 replicants were developed in 2035. So there's a chance that even though Todd never had the opportunity to meet Deckard, he might have helped out Roy Batty during one of the various battles they shared. The deleted scene might have given us a chance to witness this battle, with both individuals coming across each other. The NC17 Rating. Once the film was submitted to the MPAA, they decided to give it an NC17 rating, meaning that it wasn't for an audience under 17. Now, NC17 was renowned as a kiss of death because it was the perfect way to screw up a film's box office revenue. Even though it wasn't really surprising that Paul W.S. Anderson would execute a project to such a gruesome level, as he was coming off of Event Horizon, this film ended up getting an R rating and significantly cut down on the gore, with fans still scouring for deleted scenes and the original cut of the film. To give this movie some chance of making it at the box office, about 20 minutes of footage from the film had to be cut, including a rather brutal version of the eye gouging sequence. Apart from that, there were many other cuts that fans would remember being sure about because some of the scenes from the trailer never made it into the film. Flop! After ensuring everything with the amazing action direction from Paul W.S. Anderson, Kurt Russell as the main hero, and hints of a world reminiscent of Blade Runner, Soldier was released on the 23rd of October, 1998, and it ended up being a major flop, only managing to make about $14 million, which was about $6 million less than what they paid Kurt Russell. But this was a brutal time for Warner Brothers, with most of their releases around this time suffering both critically and through poor audience reception. The last Batman entry proved that they were going through a really bad run, and hence, they started dropping a lot of sequels that they had planned to execute. Two of the major projects among these included Superman Lives and Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian. So yeah, you have Soldier's box office failure to blame for canceling two of the most debatable projects amongst fans. But this curse didn't last long because The Matrix entered theaters a year later and changed cinema forever. Terminator Connection. Even though Paul W.S. Anderson continues to mention that the film is set in the Blade Runner universe, and if Todd had gone to Earth, he would have definitely come across Rick Deckard, screenwriter Peoples has something else to say. When asked about the connection between Blade Runner and Soldier, he went on to say, "No, I never had any thoughts about that. I wrote Soldier in 1984, very quickly on my own. I wrote it because I saw the first Terminator in the theater, stunned, and it was such a wonderful movie. I'd always wanted to write a movie in which there was a tough guy who would be seemingly unsympathetic in the lead, and I felt that the Terminator was almost there. Later, in the sequel, it was determined he was the hero, but at this time he was sort of a villain. But the fact is, he was so great. I went off and I decided to write about this Soldier." Terminator was released in 1984, and in some fashion, Blade Runner can have some connections with it. Still, as hardcore fans of cyberpunk, it would be far more interesting to imagine a universe where all these narratives coexist. The Shane-like vision. Remember 2017's Logan before Wolverine was brought back to life through the Merc with a Mouth's entry into the MCU? Logan had an interesting meta-scene where Xavier explains the plot of the 1953 film Shane to X-23, and the movie itself manages to borrow a lot from that classic film. Apparently, the original vision that David Webb Peoples had for Soldier would also be a sort of classic western like Shane, but set in space. Paul W.S. Anderson has clarified that the film didn't exactly turn out that way, but the circumstances they had to go through are very much responsible for that. Originally, a lot of the film was supposed to be shot in wide-open environments and existing locations, but the troubles at the beginning of the film made them move towards shooting it mostly on sound stages. In fact, if you look closely enough, Soldier does hint towards what it could have been if the original ideas were implemented, including the idea of Todd's threat. The most obvious parallel with Shane is the fact that Todd ends up bonding with the young child, Nathan, and then gets attracted to his mother. But that's where it ends, because we are no longer allowed to witness how dangerous Todd can be, as he hardly shows any pride in his violent behavior, something that Shane shows very clearly. Screenwriter Peoples was so disappointed in the final outcome that he didn't even watch the movie as a whole. Well, it might not be Shane, but Soldier does manage to stand on its own. Some eerie similarities. Now, it's not surprising that some of the best sci-fi films have references, and this one managed to reference practically every sci-fi project you've ever seen at that time. But some fans have noticed that the plot, apart from having a failed attempt at being Shane, has a somewhat similar narrative to the 1964 episode with the same title from The Outer Limits. There, we see a soldier named Cairo who has been trained from birth to kill the enemy and gets transported back in time with another soldier. Even the music during the climactic battle scene has a 5-note horn fanfare that the fans might identify from the 1986 Alien soundtrack. Are these supposed to be references or just fun Easter eggs? You decide. The canceled sequel. According to Kurt Russell, a sequel had already been planned and it was supposed to be greenlit right after the release, but the box office disaster prevented any chance of that coming to fruition. So, the sequel to Soldier was another canceled project that Warner Bros. Bailed on after facing many flops. But Soldier faced a much worse fate when, even though it was slated for release in UK cinemas, the poor performance in the US led Warner to cancel the UK release entirely and push for the straight-to-DVD release. Marvelous verdict! It is absolutely amazing to imagine that in the 35 years that it took to make a sequel for Blade Runner, there was a spin-off film that explored one of the arcs that has been mentioned in the original entry. While fans may not consider the movie something that deserves to be in the Blade Runner universe, it surely does have a story that could make for an amazing Blade Runner arc. Funnily enough, both films would go on to have quite the cult following after failing to make it big at the box office. That's all we got for you this time, but if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.